Hello everyone. Subscribe to the Tales List channel so you don't miss new tales. My name is Savannah, I'm 28 years old, and I'm the founder and CEO of a biotech startup in San Diego. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how I spent my life living in a shadow, only to discover that the light was mine to claim all along. For 28 years, I carried the weight of my family's constant disapproval, a deep-seated ache of never being enough. The moment I finally stood my ground, the seismic shock of revealing my truth, and the devastating, beautiful freedom that followed, it was the most painful and empowering experience of my life. This is the story of the day I stopped being the invisible daughter and became the architect of my own destiny, no matter the cost. My entire identity was forged in the brilliant, blinding light of my older sister, Eleanor. She was the prodigy, the one who aced every exam, captained the debate team, and glided effortlessly into a prestigious surgical residency. I was simply Eleanor's sister, the quiet, artistic one, with my head in the clouds. My parents' home in Phoenix was a shrine to her achievements. Her medals were displayed in a glass case, while my paintings were relegated to a dusty portfolio in the garage. Every family dinner was a recitation of Eleanor's latest triumphs, followed by a concerned, "And what are your plans, Savannah?" Their criticism was a constant, low hum in the background of my life, a soundtrack of disappointment that made me doubt my every move and my every dream, making me feel like a permanent guest in my own family. Their favorite weapon was comparison. "Eleanor was so focused at your age," my mother would sigh, when I talked about my passion for sustainable science. "Maybe you should consider a more practical field, like your sister," my father would suggest, pushing law or medicine brochures across the table. When I used my entire life savings to launch my startup instead of going to grad school, they called it a risky fantasy. When I worked 90-hour weeks in a rented lab space, surviving on coffee and determination, their calls were filled with warnings about stability and security, always punctuated with, "Eleanor just bought her own condo." I learned to build walls around my heart and my work. My ambitions, my struggles, my small, hard-won victories, they all became part of a secret life I hid from them, a life they never valued until they realized it had a price tag they wanted to claim for themselves. The final confrontation happened during a tense Thanksgiving dinner at their home. I was 27, and the condescension began the moment I walked in. "That's a interesting outfit, Savannah. Eleanor always dresses so professionally," my mother remarked. My father, over dry turkey, asked about my little science project with a patronizing smile. The breaking point came when he slid a business card for a financial planner toward me. "It's time to get serious, Savannah. This startup delusion has gone on long enough. This man can help you find a real job with a real future." Something in me, a dam holding back a lifetime of swallowed words, finally broke. But my anger didn't erupt, it crystallized into a cold, terrifying calm. I looked at their expectant, dismissive faces and made a decision. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. "A real future," I repeated, my voice unnervingly steady. I reached into my bag and pulled out my company tablet. With a few taps, I brought up a high-resolution image and turned the screen to face them. It was the cover of Forbes, 30 under 30, pioneering the future of green technology. And there, staring back at them, was my portrait. The silence was so profound I could hear the clock ticking in the next room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a slow, dawning realization that shifted into something ugly. "This," I said, my finger resting on my own image, "is my little science project. It's currently valued at $65 million. We're closing a Series B funding round next month. Does that qualify as a real future, or should I still call that financial planner?" The shock in the room wilted away, replaced by a voracious, entitled hunger. 65 million? My father breathed, his eyes wide not with pride, but with calculation. And you didn't think to involve your family? We could have advised you. We could have invested. My mother's expression morphed from shock to a kind of greedy excitement. Savannah, this is incredible. Your father and I have been so worried about retirement, and Eleanor's medical school debts are staggering. You've been hiding this from us while we struggled. The narrative flipped in an instant. I was no longer the disappointing daughter. I was a miser, hoarding a treasure they viewed as a family asset. The Eleanor show was abruptly cancelled, and the new production was Savannah's Secret Fortune, a family emergency. The weeks that followed were a relentless siege of family meetings and financial planning sessions that were nothing but thinly veiled demands. They wanted me to pay off their mortgage, to clear Eleanor's six-figure student loans, to set up a trust fund for their grandchildren that didn't exist yet. I refused, each time explaining calmly that the capital was tied up in research, development, and payroll. My refusal was met with escalating fury. They called me selfish, ungrateful, a traitor to the family. The ultimate betrayal came not in a shout, but in the form of a crisp, formal letter from a law firm. It threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress and unjust enrichment, claiming their parental investment in my upbringing entitled them to a share of my success. Holding that piece of paper, I felt nothing but a cold, final severance. The last thread of hope was cut. My response was swift and merciless. I had my legal team send a cease and desist letter so forceful it could have pinned a man to the wall. It outlined, in brutal legal terminology, that they had no standing to claim a dime. Attached was a meticulously itemized list of every financial gift I had ever given them. The paid-off car note, the surprise property tax bill I covered, the luxury anniversary vacation I funded, demonstrating that the financial flow had been one way for years. The letter stated that any further communication would be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly. The silence that followed was deafening. I had fought their emotional warfare with the cold, hard facts of business, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow, a triumph that tasted like ash and loneliness. I had secured my independence, but I had incinerated the bridge to my family in the process. The true final act of their retaliation came 8 months later. I was in my San Diego office, finally feeling a semblance of peace, when a real estate alert I'd forgotten to disable lit up my phone. It was from my childhood neighborhood in Phoenix. And there it was, a listing for my parents' house. The home where I'd taken my first steps, where I cried myself to sleep feeling unseen, was now on the market. The description mentioned a motivated seller and a quick. I felt it was the first time I was a place of living hard and crazy passions at the price. They weren't just cutting me out emotionally and financially, they were literally selling the physical foundation of our shared history. They were erasing me so completely, they were selling the walls I grew up within, and they hadn't even had the decency to tell me. It was the ultimate act of symbolic violence. Sitting in my sleek, quiet office, staring at the virtual tour of my empty childhood home, I braced for a collapse that never came. Instead of grief, a profound, almost spiritual clarity washed over me. They had sold the house not just for money, but as a final, dramatic gesture to punish me. They were burning the village to feel its warmth one last time. And in that moment, I realized their power was gone. Truly, completely gone. Noble days have times for rate to fly. At the anchors of their approval, the chains of their criticism, the very ghost of that house, it was all released. I felt an unimaginable lightness. I closed the browser tab, took a deep breath of my own air, In my own city, and knew I was finally, unequivocally, free. The past was sold, and my future was mine alone to write. The following year was a journey of deep, intentional healing. The initial euphoria of freedom settled into the steady, sometimes difficult work of building a new identity, one that wasn't defined by opposition to my family. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and we began the painstaking process of unpacking a lifetime of emotional neglect. I learned to recognize the internalized voice of my parents' criticism and to consciously replace it with my own. I allowed myself to grieve the family I never had, to cry for the little girl who just wanted to be seen for who she was, not compared to who she wasn't. It was a lonely process, but it was also the most honest and empowering work I have ever done for myself. I decided to make a symbolic purchase, one that would solidify my new reality. I bought a stunning, modern property on a cliffside overlooking a Pacific Ocean. The process of designing and furnishing it was a therapeutic act of self-definition. Every choice, from the minimalist furniture to the vibrant art on the walls, was a declaration of my own taste, my own peace, my own worth. This wasn't a house bought for status or to impress anyone. It was a sanctuary built solely for my happiness. The first night I spent there, listening to the waves crash below, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of my own contentment. I had built a new home, both physically and spiritually. About 18 months after the house sale, I received an email from Eleanor. It was hesitant, stripped of the arrogance I associated with her. She asked if we could talk. My first instinct was to delete it, to maintain the clean break. The doctors would followed anything that should be happy because we lived more humans. It was never really about you, Savannah, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It was about them. You were the scapegoat because you dared to be different. When you built your own world and walked away, their whole system collapsed. They expected me to single-handedly fulfill all their dreams and bankroll their retirement. I couldn't do it. She told me she was in therapy, finally confronting the profound damage of our upbringing. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't make excuses. She simply shared her own truth, and for the first time in our lives, I saw my sister not as a rival, but as an intangible elf to me, is an end. And she was worthy of her pride. That conversation with Eleanor was a pivotal moment. It didn't magically fix everything, but it offered a form of validation I hadn't known I needed. It confirmed that the problem was never my inherent lack of worth, but a deeply flawed family system. We decided to proceed with caution, building a new adult relationship on our own terms, separate from our parents. It's a slow, careful process, but it's honest. We talk about our work, our lives, our struggles, without the poisonous filter of parental comparison. In a strange way, my parents' ultimate act of rejection, selling the house, created the space for my sister and I to finally find each other. The clarity and relief I feel now are the bedrock of my life. The constant background anxiety of not measuring up is gone. I no longer feel a knot in my stomach when my phone rings. I sleep deeply and peacefully. My company is thriving, not as a rebellion, but as a pure expression of my passion and skill. I travel, I cultivate deep friendships, I invest in myself. The freedom to make choices based solely on my own desires and values, without the weight of familial judgment, is a gift I give myself every single day. The life I have built is authentically, unapologetically mine. Through this brutal, beautiful journey, I learned that no is a complete sentence, and that setting a boundary is the highest form of self-respect. I learned that being called selfish by people who seek to consume you is actually a compliment. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by mutual respect, support, and the freedom to be your authentic self. My life is no longer a resource to be extracted by others. It is my own sovereign entity, and I am its fierce and loving guardian. The little girl who felt invisible now knows her own power, and she will never again give it away. If you are listening to this and you feel that familiar ache of never being enough, if you feel the weight of constant comparison smothering your spirit, please hear me. You are not flawed. You are not a disappointment. Your worth is not determined by anyone else's measuring stick. The moment you choose to honor your own path, the ground will feel shaky, but it is the first step onto the path you were always meant to walk. It is the bravest, most profound act of self-love you will ever commit. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to build your own life on your own terms. They sold the family home to punish me, to show me the desolate landscape of a life without their presence and approval. They thought they were exiling me to a wasteland, and in a way they were right. The landscape of my life after their departure was indeed vast and empty, but it was a wasteland of their making, a barren field now cleared of their constant criticism, their manipulative guilt, their bottomless financial hunger. And in that quiet, fertile space, I have not just built a house, I have cultivated a paradise. It is not a loud or boastful place, but it is strong, it is serene, and it is entirely, beautifully mine. They intended the silence to be my prison, but it became the soil for my liberation. So, that's my story. Savannah, 28, from San Diego. The woman who was told she was nothing, and in the process of refusing to believe it, found everything. The relief is a constant warm hum in my veins now. The clarity is like the sharp, clean air after a storm. The journey was a painful rebirth, a brutal pruning of my family tree, but it was the most necessary pilgrimage of my life. It led me home, to myself. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Tales List channel so you don't miss new tales.